83 seconds. That is exactly how long the silence lasted after the question was asked. 83 seconds of nothing. No response, no denial, no clever pivot, just the sound of a pen rolling off the edge of the table and hitting the marble floor. And in those 83 seconds, the most powerful law enforcement official in the country sat perfectly still, while the color drained from her face like water from a cracked glass. The cameras caught every frame. The photographers in the back row stopped adjusting their lenses because they already had the shot. And the woman sitting behind the microphone, the one the world calls Pam Bondi, realized in that moment that the trap had already closed around her long before she walked into the room. Now, before I go any further, I need you to understand something. What you are about to hear was buried. It was scrubbed from the front pages within hours. The networks that were supposed to cover this wall-to-wall moved on to a celebrity scandal before the hearing even ended. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself who benefits when moments like this disappear from public memory. So if you believe that accountability still matters, if you believe that no one is above the questioning, I need you to subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications, because we are the only ones keeping this record alive. Let me take you back to the beginning of that morning. The hearing room was already at capacity 40 minutes before the session was scheduled to begin. The gallery was packed with staffers, journalists, legal analysts, and a handful of sketch artists who had been covering these proceedings for decades. The overhead lights cast a flat, sterile glow across the mahogany dais where the committee members would sit. There were 14 chairs behind the elevated bench, each one with a nameplate, a microphone, and a stack of briefing documents. But one chair mattered more than all the others. It was positioned dead center in the second row, slightly offset from the main panel, and it belonged to Jasmine Crockett. She arrived 12 minutes early, which was unusual. Most members filter in at the last moment, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with the press. Not today. Jasmine Crockett walked in through the side entrance carrying a single object, a thin blue folder. It was not thick. It was not overflowing with papers. In fact, it looked almost empty, which made it all the more unsettling. She placed it on the desk in front of her microphone, adjusted it so the edges were perfectly parallel with the table, and then she sat down without saying a word to anyone. A staffer leaned in to whisper something and she simply raised one finger. Not now. That was the signal. Everyone on her team understood what it meant. The preparation was over. The execution was about to begin. Pam Bondi arrived precisely on time, flanked by 2 senior attorneys and a communications aide who was already scanning the room for camera positions. She was composed. Her posture was impeccable. She greeted the committee chair with a measured smile and took her seat at the witness table, adjusting her microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had testified dozens of times before. From the outside, she looked unshakable. But if you watched closely, and I mean closely, you would have noticed one small detail. As she settled into her chair, her eyes moved to the second row and locked onto that thin blue folder. It was brief. Maybe half a second. But it was enough. She had seen it. And somewhere behind the composure, a calculation had already begun. The first 90 minutes of the hearing were procedural. Other members asked broad questions about departmental policy, budget allocations, and oversight protocols. Pam Bondi handled each one with rehearsed precision. She cited statutes by number. She referenced internal reviews. She redirected difficult questions with the skill of someone who had been coached extensively. Her attorneys barely moved. The aide behind her checked messages on a phone and seemed almost bored. Everything was going according to plan. Their plan. Then the chair recognized Jasmine Crockett. The shift in the room was immediate. It was not dramatic. There was no sudden gasp or murmur from the gallery. It was quieter than that. It was the sound of 27 pens stopping at the same time. It was the slight forward lean of every journalist in the first 3 rows. It was the almost imperceptible stiffening of Pam Bondi's shoulders as she turned to face the new questioner. Jasmine Crockett did not open with a greeting. She did not thank Pam Bondi for her service. She did not offer the usual pleasantries that lubricate these exchanges. She opened the thin blue folder, removed a single sheet of paper, and held it up so the camera behind her could capture it. She began with a date. Not a year. Not a month. A specific date. She cited the exact day a particular wire transfer was initiated from an offshore account to a domestic legal trust. She cited the amount. Not a round number. A precise figure down to the cent. And then she asked her first question. Were you aware of this transaction on the date it occurred? Pam Bondi blinked. It was subtle, but it was there. She leaned forward slightly and asked for the question to be repeated. Jasmine Crockett repeated it, word for word, without changing a single syllable. Pam Bondi paused, glanced to her left where her attorney was already reaching for a notepad, and said she would need to review her records before providing a definitive answer. Jasmine Crockett nodded slowly and said that was perfectly fine. Because she had more. What followed was not a line of questioning. It was an architectural demolition performed with surgical tools. Jasmine Crockett did not raise her voice. She did not grandstand. She did not perform for the cameras. She simply laid out the evidence piece by piece like a prosecutor presenting a case to a jury that had already made up its mind. The second document referenced a series of deleted communications recovered during a parallel investigation. Jasmine Crockett read the timestamp of each deletion. Not the dates. The timestamps. Down to the minute. She noted that 17 of the deletions occurred within a 90-minute window on the same evening that a key witness was scheduled to provide testimony in a related proceeding. 17 deletions in 90 minutes. She let that number hang in the air like smoke. Pam Bondi shifted in her chair. It was the first visible movement she had made beyond the controlled gestures of her earlier testimony. Her right hand moved to the base of her water glass, but she did not pick it up. Her attorney leaned in and whispered something. Pam Bondi gave a barely perceptible nod but did not break eye contact with Jasmine Crockett. She was trying to hold the line. But the line was already breaking. The third document was the one that changed the temperature in the room. Jasmine Crockett pulled it from the folder and placed it face down on the desk. She did not reveal its contents immediately. Instead, she asked Pam Bondi a simple question. Had she ever had any communication, direct or indirect, written or verbal, with any individual connected to the investigation that had been the subject of international attention for over a decade? Pam Bondi straightened in her chair and delivered what sounded like a carefully rehearsed denial. She stated clearly and firmly that she had no such communications and that any suggestion to the contrary was without basis. Jasmine Crockett waited 3 full seconds after the denial. 3 seconds. In a hearing room, 3 seconds feels like 30. Then she turned the document over. Now I need to pause here for just a moment. I need to say something directly to you. What you are watching right now is the kind of moment that powerful people spend millions of dollars trying to make sure you never see. This is the moment where the official story cracks open and something real spills out. If you want this kind of truth to keep reaching people, I need you to hit that like button right now and smash the hype button. This is not about an algorithm. This is about making sure that what happened in that room does not get buried like everything else. Do it now. I will wait. The document was a log. Not a summary. Not a second-hand account. A log. It contained records of indirect communications routed through an intermediary over a period of 14 months. The routing method was deliberate. The channels used were not standard government systems. They were private, encrypted, and they had been archived by a source that the committee had verified independently. Jasmine Crockett read 7 entries from the log. Each one included a date, a duration, and a reference code that corresponded to specific matters under investigation. She did not editorialize. She did not accuse. She simply read the entries and then looked up. Pam Bondi's reaction was the story. Her left hand, the one closest to the camera, gripped the edge of the table. Her jaw tightened. You could see the muscles in her neck shift as she swallowed. Her lead attorney was no longer whispering. He was writing furiously on a legal pad, his pen moving so fast that you could hear the scratch of it on the paper through the microphone. The communications aide behind Pam Bondi had put down the phone. For the first time in 2 hours, every single person at the witness table was fully alert. Jasmine Crockett asked her next question with the calm of someone who already knew the answer. She asked Pam Bondi to explain how these communications existed if she had just testified under oath that no such communications had ever taken place. The room waited. Pam Bondi opened her mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. She said she would need to consult with her legal counsel before responding to questions about specific documents she had not had the opportunity to review in advance. Jasmine Crockett replied that Pam Bondi had been provided with these materials 72 hours ago through the proper committee channels. She cited the delivery confirmation number. She cited the name of the office that received the package. She cited the time it was signed for. 47 seconds of silence. I counted. The broadcast feed captured every single one of them. Pam Bondi sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere between the microphone and the edge of the table. Her attorneys had stopped writing. The aide had stopped moving entirely. It was as if someone had pressed pause on reality, and the only thing still running was the clock on the wall above the gallery entrance. When Pam Bondi finally spoke, her voice was different. The polished, rehearsed cadence was gone. In its place was something thinner, more fragile, like a wire being stretched to its limit. She stated that she stood by her earlier testimony and that any discrepancies in the documentation would need to be reviewed by her legal team in a more appropriate setting. It was the kind of answer that sounds reasonable on paper, but in that room, in that moment, with those documents sitting face up on the desk, it landed like a confession wrapped in legal language. Jasmine Crockett was not finished. She pulled one final sheet from the folder. This one was different. It was not a log. It was not a financial record. It was a flight manifest. A single page listing passenger names, dates, and destinations for a private aircraft that had become the most infamous symbol of institutional complicity in modern history. Jasmine Crockett did not read from it. She simply held it up, let the cameras focus, and asked one question. Can you confirm that this manifest, which has been authenticated by 3 independent forensic analysts, does not contain any reference to your office, your staff, or any entity operating under your direct authority? Pam Bondi did not answer. She turned to her attorney. The attorney turned to the aide. The aide looked at the floor. Nobody spoke. Jasmine Crockett placed the manifest down on the desk, closed the blue folder, and said she had no further questions at this time. At this time. Those 3 words carried the weight of everything that was coming next. The hearing room did not erupt. There was no shouting. No dramatic walkout. What happened was worse. There was a slow, heavy exhale from the gallery, as if 70 people had been holding their breaths simultaneously and finally let go. Pam Bondi gathered her papers with hands that were not quite steady. Her lead attorney placed a hand on her forearm, not to comfort, but to steady. To keep her grounded in the chair for just a few more minutes until the cameras turned away. But the cameras did not turn away. Not this time. What you just witnessed is not simply a difficult day for a public official. This is the visible edge of something much larger and much darker. This is what happens when the institutions that are supposed to protect the public become instruments of protection for the powerful. When the people who are supposed to enforce the law become the ones who need to be investigated. The question is no longer whether something was hidden. The documents answered that. The question now is how deep it goes, who else knew, and what happens to a system of justice when the person running it cannot answer basic questions about her own conduct under oath. You are the jury now. Not a metaphorical jury. A real one. Because the traditional mechanisms of accountability have already shown you whose side they are on. They showed you when they cut away from this hearing after 40 minutes to cover a product launch. They showed you when the official transcript was edited before it was released to the public record. They showed you when the follow-up story was buried on page 14 of every major outlet in the country. The only courtroom that still works is this one. Right here. This channel. This community. And speaking of this community, if you have made it this far, you are already part of something. But I want to offer you more. The 47 Club is where the inner circle lives. Members of the 47 Club get access to documents before they appear in any video. They get the unredacted timelines. They get the connections between cases that we cannot publish on the main channel because they would be flagged and suppressed within hours. The link is in the description below and in the pinned comment. Joining is free, but what you get is priceless. Now I need to tell you what happens next, because this story is far from over. Tomorrow morning, a closed-door session has been scheduled. Not a public hearing. A closed-door session. The committee has issued 4 new subpoenas and requested access to a classified archive that has never been opened in the context of this investigation. Jasmine Crockett's office released a single statement after today's hearing. It was 1 sentence long. It said, "We are just getting started." There is a second folder. It is not blue. It is red. And according to 2 sources who have spoken to us on condition of anonymity, it contains material that makes today's revelations look like a preface. I cannot tell you what is in it. Not yet. Not until the session concludes and the documents enter the congressional record. But I can tell you this. When the contents of that red folder become public, the conversation around this case will change permanently. Turn on your notifications. Not because I am asking you to. Because you cannot afford to miss what comes next. The next video drops the moment that session ends. And trust me, you want to be here when it does.